Hey guys, tonight we're heading into the misty marshes of 17th century Holland, where fireflies blink like old lanterns and the croaking of frogs echoes louder than common sense. You're standing on the edge of a moonlit canal, damp socks clinging to your feet, and somewhere out in the reeds, 1,000 tiny amphibian voices are tuning up for the worst lullaby in European history. The air smells like moss and powdered wigs. Sleep? Forget it. You're about to become a soldier in the strangest war ever declared. Not against men or nations, but against frogs. Actual frogs. And here's the twist. You probably won't survive this. Not because the frogs are armed, although who knows what the scholars left out, but because this story descends so far into absurdity, your grip on sanity might come undone like a rough in the rain. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, I love knowing where you're tuning in from. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're at the edge of the woods, where the marsh begins. A torch burns low behind you, casting long shadows on the hedges. The croaking is relentless. Deep, vibrating bellows from bullfrogs, high squeaks from tree frogs, and that awful in-between ribbit like a hiccup trying to sound brave. You glance toward the manor house behind you, windows flung open to the night. And there he is, Prince Maurice of Nassau, staring into the reeds with the same expression he probably wore at war councils. He doesn't blink. He doesn't smile. He mutters something in Dutch that translates loosely to blast these demonic trumpets, then throws a leather slipper into the darkness. It lands with a wet plop. A few seconds of silence. Then, louder than before, the frogs croak in unison, as if mocking him. That's when he says it. Mobilize the guards. You think he's joking. Everyone does. But when the footmen start lighting more torches and the captain of the guard starts issuing commands like flank the southern lily patch, it becomes clear Prince Maurice isn't bluffing. The war has begun. Historians still argue whether this night was a result of battle trauma, palace wine, or sheer noble eccentricity. But you're not a historian. You're a servant, and now, somehow a soldier. You grip your borrowed pike like a broom and march toward the marsh with 8 others, half of them yawning, the other half laughing nervously. One guy's brought a helmet full of mint leaves because someone told him frogs hate the smell. You try not to trip on tree roots in the dark. It gets swampier fast. Your boots sink into mud with each step, making that gross slurp noise like someone kissing a jellyfish. The croaking surrounds you now. You can't tell if there are 100 frogs or 1,000, but they seem to have no fear of humans. One bold green one just sits on your boot, staring up at you like, what now, gladiator? You don't have an answer. No one does. You reach the water's edge. The captain raises a hand. On my count. Seriously? A coordinated volley? 3, 2. Someone sneezes. Fire. Muskets blaze. The air fills with smoke, gunpowder, and the smell of wet algae. Somewhere in the reeds, a flock of herons takes off, screaming in protest. A frog leaps across your shoulder. You shriek. No shame. It was cold and squishy. The chaos is brief and pointless. The frogs croak louder, if anything. One soldier swears they're harmonizing now. Another insists he saw one flex its throat at him like a challenge. Back at the palace, Prince Maurice demands results. He paces the hallway in embroidered slippers. Yes, he changed shoes, muttering about how even the Spanish never made this much noise at night. You and your squad return so confused and frogless. But the prince isn't giving up. Over the next few nights, the war effort escalates. Nets are issued, so are lanterns and poles with little hooks. Someone suggests building tiny barricades around known croaking spots. The gardener, for reasons unclear, creates a tiny helmet for his pet toad and names him General Crockwell. No one stops him. Frankly, morale is low, and it's oddly comforting. Meanwhile, in the village, the locals start whispering. Stories spread of the madness in the palace. Children leave dead frogs on noble doorsteps as jokes. One poet even pens a satirical verse titled The Amphibian Uprising, which becomes popular in taverns. You hear a group of drunk bakers singing it as they stumble home. replacing every word with ribbit. And yet the prince persists. Every evening, you return to the swamp. Sometimes you light fires to scare the frogs. Sometimes you try to trap them. One evening, you're ordered to reason with them. So you crouch by a pond and read from a book of Psalms. A frog burps. A second one hops onto your knee and pees. Clearly not impressed by scripture. Historians agree Prince Maurice had endured serious trauma during the Dutch revolt. He lost comrades, fought impossible odds, and survived betrayal more than once. But they still debate whether this frog campaign was a mental break, a symbolic act, or perhaps a cruel satire of military formalities. Some even suggest it was staged to test loyalty among his inner circle. Either way, you're in it now. On the fifth night, something strange happens. You return to the palace with a single frog in a cage, a chubby green one with odd black markings on its back. The prince leans close and stares at it for a long time. Then, slowly, he smiles. "You shall be our prisoner," he says. You nod slowly. The frog, understandably, looks unimpressed. That night, the croaking seems softer. Or maybe your ears are just tired. The war is far from over, but in this moment, it feels like maybe, just maybe, peace is possible. Then a second frog croaks, louder than the rest. The prince hurls a candelabra, and you sigh, realizing tomorrow's battle will begin at dawn. The sun rises slow and syrup-thick over the Dutch countryside, spilling a milky gold across endless canals and willow-lined dikes. You trudge back to barracks, boots squishing like wet bread, your breath puffing in little clouds that vanish over cabbage fields. Somewhere behind you, the croaking still echoes, faint but defiant. Welcome to 17th century Holland. If you weren't currently involved in an amphibian standoff, you might actually appreciate the place. Holland is a patchwork of carefully managed land, low, flat, and so meticulously drained that even the cows seem impressed. Water wheels spin with rhythmic clanks. Windmills turn lazily, slicing up the clouds like kitchen knives. Every inch of ground has been claimed, wrestled from the sea by sheer human stubbornness and an army of shovel-wielding peasants. You walk past the tulip farm. The blooms haven't opened yet, but the bulbs are so valuable some folks guard them with actual dogs. A few years back, one bulb sold for the price of a canal house. People wept. People stabbed. Tulip mania, they called it. So yes, irrational passion for odd things isn't unheard of here, including frog wars. In town, the people dress neatly, even if their sleeves smell faintly of herring. Wide collars, starched ruffs, breeches that always seem a bit too ambitious for the wearer's thighs. Markets buzz early, full of gossip, pickle goods, and that one guy who insists eel is breakfast food. You stop by a stall to buy a bread roll, but the vendor just squints at your mud-streaked uniform and says, "You're one of his, aren't you?" You nod. He snorts. Tell your Prince the Frogs are winning. You would laugh, but you're not entirely sure he's wrong. Historians often point to this period, roughly the mid-1600s, as the Dutch Golden Age. Trade is booming, thanks to merchant fleets crisscrossing the globe with nutmeg, porcelain, and the occasional monkey. Dutch art thrives, too. Rembrandt's painting peasant noses and shadows so intense they could scowl. But with all this brilliance comes a kind of nervous energy. Everyone's always doing something. Trading, painting, inventing telescopes, declaring war on croaking. You pass by the city's frog board, a notice pinned to a wooden post showing the prince's personal sketch of what he calls a known agitator. It looks more like a sad blob with legs and a top hat, but the resemblance to certain swamp residents is uncanny. Below it is a bounty, 1 guilder for any frog removed from palace grounds. Must be intact. One boy walks by holding a frog in a teacup, singing softly, "I'm gonna be rich." You don't have the heart to tell him. It's probably the wrong species. What's stranger, though, is how fast people are adjusting. By noon, frog chasing becomes a spectator sport. Children play Prince Maurice's army, marching through puddles and tossing stones at imaginary amphibians. A baker creates frog-shaped buns, complete with licorice eyes. Even the town priest, not one to endorse nonsense, references spiritual croaking in his sermon. You're still not sure if that was metaphor or exhaustion. But amid the humor, something deeper stirs. The Dutch are famously practical. When faced with floods, they build dikes. When threatened by invasion, they flood entire provinces to slow enemy troops. So why, you wonder, is everyone so okay with this absurd campaign? Some whisper it's just safer to nod and smile. Others genuinely seem to enjoy the break from routine. A war with no real enemy, no bloodshed, only soggy socks and a little rebiting? Kind of a relief, really. Then again, not everyone is amused. You return to the palace just in time to hear a visiting magistrate scolding the prince over brunch. Something about mockery of noble governance and diplomatic consequences if France hears of this. Prince Maurice listens with one eyebrow raised, slicing his poached trout with surgical precision. "My dear Otto," he says calmly, "do you not hear them? Even now? Behind the rose hedge? Plotting their night opera?" Otto sighs and leaves without finishing his coffee. That night, back on patrol, the fog rolls in thick and heavy. Your torch barely pierces it. Every rustle sounds like a leap. Every splash, treason. You start to imagine things. Eyes blinking just under the waterline. Croaks that form words. You're about to tell the guy next to you when he whispers, "You saw it too?" You nod. Neither of you speak for the rest of the shift. Historians still argue whether the prince's actions were tolerated out of loyalty, fear, or sheer disbelief. Holland was a monarchy, technically. More of a republic with nobles who took turns acting like kings. Prince Maurice was military leader, not crown royalty. But after decades of war, his word carried weight. People followed him out of habit, reverence, and a hope that maybe this latest obsession would pass like a thunderstorm over the dunes. Still, some of the older guards remember a different Maurice. The sharp strategist who routed Spanish forces. The prince who enforced discipline so ruthlessly soldiers feared even chewing too loudly in camp. What changed? The answer might lie in the countryside, where you're now being sent. A small village has reported unusual amphibian behavior, which is vague, alarming, and not at all what you wanted to hear after last night's ghost frog incident. You ride out with 3 others, all equally sleep-deprived and jumpy. The village greets you with herbal tea and sarcasm. You here to negotiate peace? We put up signs. No croaking after sunset. Didn't help. One old woman offers to bless your boots. Another tries to sell you frog repellent that smells suspiciously like vinegar and boiled cabbage. You buy it anyway. Desperation is a powerful sales motivator. Just before dusk, you investigate the nearby marsh. Sure enough, the frogs seem unusually bold. One sits on a fence post like it owns the place. Another hops across your path, croaks once, and disappears, leaving behind a half-eaten beetle and an unsettling silence. Then you spot it, a crude little frog-sized shrine. Twigs, moss, and a shiny coin nestled in the center. You freeze. One of your squad mates whispers, "Is this worship?" "No," you say too quickly. "Of course not. That'd be insane." But deep down, you're not so sure. You ride back to the palace in silence. The stars above twinkle as if holding back laughter. The frogs begin their chorus once more, and you realize something. This isn't just a story you're part of anymore. This is legend in the making. The palace looms ahead, its spires cutting into the dusky sky like stern fingers wagging at the moon. You've never noticed how gothic it feels until now, like it's leaning in, whispering secrets through the ivy. The frogs resume their nightly chorus as you pass the gate. You're convinced they wait for darkness out of sheer theatrical flair. Inside, the halls are buzzing with the usual mix of candlelight, bootsteps, and awkward deference. You pass a servant muttering something about requisitioning a rain barrel for interrogation, and a steward logging the day's frog sightings with the seriousness of plague reports. There's an unmistakable shift in tone. What started as a joke is becoming organized. All of it traces back to him, Prince Maurice of Nassau. He's in his war room tonight, hunched over maps, brushing crumbs off troop placements with precision of man who once won sieges with fewer resources they now dedicates to amphibians. You ease into the corner, trying to blend into the paneling, but his voice cuts through the tension like shears through silk. "Look at this marshland," he says, jabbing a tiny silver dagger into a section of the map. 6 croaking vectors converging by the reeds. That is not random. That is orchestration. You want to object? Maybe point out that frogs don't orchestrate, but the man beside you, the court cartographer, just nods gravely and starts drawing concentric circles. You sigh internally. It's going to be one of those nights. Prince Maurice isn't what most imagine when they hear Prince. No golden curls or doe-eyed charm. He's sharp angles and sharper instincts, a soldier from cradle. Trained not to flatter, but to dominate. His father, William the Silent, died from an assassin's bullet. Maurice grew up wary, watchful, and allergic to failure. By the time he was 20, he was leading armies. By 30, he was reshaping Dutch warfare. Historians still argue whether Maurice was a visionary or just an efficient tyrant. What's certain is that he never believed in chance. Not on the battlefield, not in politics, and certainly not when it came to being kept awake by dozens of croaking pests outside his linen-draped windows. A fringe theory, whispered only by particularly brave or particularly drunk historians, suggests that Maurice viewed the frogs as a metaphor for civil unrest. Small, disorganized, but constant, and like any good general, he believed in nipping insurgency in the bud. You wouldn't be surprised. The man holds grudges like family heirlooms. Tonight, he paces slowly around the room, each step a metronome of irritation. He stops to peer out the window. They taunt me, he mutters. The moment I sleep, they begin. You glance outside. Sure enough, the reeds ripple slightly and then, like a choir giving its cue, ribbit, ribbit, ribbit. The prince slams the window shut. Across the room, a scribe scribbles. Croaking peaked at 2104. Response, window assault. And still, he's not laughed out of power. Because here's the twist. Despite this feverish obsession, Maurice isn't considered mad. Not yet. He's respected, feared. A war hero who never lost a real battle, whose enemies underestimate him only once. He's also deeply paranoid, with a habit of testing loyalty by setting impossible tasks. That thought hits you hard. What if the frogs aren't the point? What if this is just the prince's way of seeing who obeys, who questions, and who snickered behind his back? That would explain the new curfew for palace staff, or the sudden inspection of servants' quarters for unauthorized frogs. You recall one terrified cook being dragged off last night after a toad was found in the stew pot. To be fair, it was croaking. You shift uneasily. At dinner, Maurice says little. He dines with 3 generals and a poet, because apparently poetic morale is now a tactical concern. You stand behind his chair, doing your best impression of wallpaper, while they discuss psychological warfare through targeted silence. The poet, a round fellow with a wine-reddened nose, proposes composing lullabies for frogs. Perhaps, he says dreamily, they'll croak themselves into slumber if we beat them at their own game. Maurice doesn't blink. See to it, he says, stabbing a pickle. And just like that, you have a frog silence in department. The next morning, you're assigned to patrol the East Garden. It used to be a place for quiet strolls and badly hidden courtly affairs. Now, it's got tripwires, scent traps, and a man in a bush who insists he's developed croak-mimicking boots. You decide not to ask. Midway through your route, you spot a frog sitting on the prince's statue, one leg casually draped over the base. The brazenness is chilling. You move to shoo it off, but it just stares at you. You swear it raises an eyebrow. That night, you don't sleep, not because of the croaking. It's quieter, strangely, but because of the dream. You're standing knee-deep in water. Frogs surround you. One wears a crown. Another speaks in Prince Maurice's voice. Obedience, it says, is the root of silence. You wake up sweaty, confused, and with a frog on your pillow. You scream. It hops away. That morning, no one mocks you. Not even the guards. Because everyone's got a story now. Someone found a frog in their boot. Another saw a line of them marching single file. One man swears they're spelling messages in lily pads. He's reassigned to moat duty immediately. Historians still debate whether Maurice truly believed he was under siege, or whether he was simply crafting a distraction for more subtle political maneuvering. The Dutch Republic was a tense place. power balanced delicately between provinces, merchants, and nobles with egos the size of windmills. A good scandal could tip the scales. So maybe, just maybe, the prince needed a spectacle. A harmless war. A show of strength. Something ridiculous to mask something real. But to you, stuck in a damp uniform, dodging suspicious amphibians, and wondering whether poetry counts as a tactical resource, it just feels personal. That night, Prince Maurice unveils a new plan. We dig a moat, he says, around the reeds. Someone clears their throat. Sire, the reeds are in the moat. He pauses. Then we drain it. No one argues. No one dares. And you, tired and bewildered, simply nod. Because when a prince declares war on frogs and no one stops him, you either help dig the moat or end up croaking in it. The morning fog clings to your uniform like wet silk, and your hands are blistered from last night's failed moat-digging expedition, which, as it turns out, was mostly symbolic, since the marshland is already saturated to the point of absurdity. But that doesn't stop Prince Maurice from storming out at dawn with a measuring rod and a plan sketched on the back of a dinner napkin. This will be the perimeter, he mutters, poking at patches of waterlogged soil. We must define the enemy's domain before we can breach it. You know what? Though you're pretty sure you just built a moat around a swamp. By now, the castle guards are divided into informal factions. Team elimination, kill all the frogs. Team relocation, gently transport them elsewhere. And team appeasement, maybe bribe them. You've tried all three methods, with varying degrees of failure. The frogs, apparently, have no intention of playing by the rules of engagement. Tonight, you're stationed just outside the east veranda. Again, because that's where the croaking has reached its most deafening crescendo. The noise is practically seismic. You swear the teacups inside the drawing room are rattling. The palace staff has started referring to it as the night chorus, and more than one chambermaid claims it's synchronized. You press your ear to the air. Ribbit, ribbit, tribbit, ribbit. Yep, that's a pattern. Prince Maurice, of course, is livid. He storms on the veranda in his night robe velvet, embroidered, lightly scented with rosemary, clutching a spyglass and a half-eaten pear. He peers into the darkness, muttering military terms under his breath. They reposition, he says, pointing to a cluster of reeds. They weren't there last night. They've adapted. This is siege warfare. You clear your throat. Sir, with respect, they're frogs. He turns slowly. Exactly. And they're winning. That's when he makes the official proclamation. As of sunrise, the frogs are to be declared enemies of the state. The grounds around the palace are now considered occupied territory, and any croaking heard between the hours of dusk and dawn is to be treated as an act of sonic aggression. You are officially at war. You know how absurd it sounds. You really do. But you also know that denying Prince Maurice when he's in full tactical meltdown mode is unwise. This is the same man who once had a man arrested for blinking too loudly during a war council. Historians still argue whether this was a performance, a calculated display of dominance, or whether Maurice genuinely believed the frogs were conspiring against him. But in that moment, on that veranda, he is completely, terrifyingly sincere. And so begins the next phase of what you now refer to, mostly in whispers, as the croaking campaign. First come the scouts. Small, fast-moving teams equipped with lanterns, nets, and something the prince calls amphibious deterrent powder. It's just crushed mint and chalk dust, but it's applied with great seriousness around known frog hotbeds. Next, the prince orders a full mapping of the pond perimeters. You spend the entire afternoon crouching by the water's edge with a quill and parchment, counting frogs. There are more than anyone thought. Dozens, maybe hundreds. And they don't flinch anymore. They sit on lily pads like smug little barons, blinking slowly, as if to say, do your worst. You spot one that appears to be twice the size of the others. It's perched regally atop a log, throat ballooning like a bellows. You point. That one, that's the leader. A nearby officer nods grimly. Codename, the Baron, back at the palace. Prince Maurice demands nightly briefings. You find yourself reporting troop movements of frogs. Today they relocated to the northwest cattails. They appear to be forming concentric swim rings, We lost one net to sabotage. A frog chewed through the twine. He listens intently, taking notes. Occasionally he sketches diagrams. Most look suspiciously like pastries. A fringe detail emerges during one of these briefings. A gardener claims the frogs are responding to music. He swears that when he hummed a lute tune, they stopped croaking and started hopping in rhythm. This information is escalated immediately, and the palace musicians are summoned for tactical melody trials. That night, the croaking begins just after sundown. But this time, there's an answer. From a rose garden, a gentle lute melody rises, soft, soothing, a lullaby of sorts. You don't expect anything to happen. But then, silence. A brief, wonderful pause. No croaking. Just stillness. Everyone holds their breath. Then, from the far end of the marsh, a single frog lets out an almost mocking ribbiete. High-pitched, deliberate. A second later, the whole chorus resumes. Twice as loud. The prince punches a sundial. Music is now banned. At dinner, no one speaks. The clink of silverware is the loudest sound in the room. Someone knocks over a goblet, and 4 people flinch. The stress is mounting. One scribe begins referring to the frogs in military terms. The Green Division has occupied Quadrant 3. Another insists the croaking is code, a series of signals. You want to dismiss it, but then you remember the rhythm, the coordination, the sheer persistence of it all. Historians today still marvel at how something so ridiculous spiraled into such a grand narrative. Some say the prince was using the frog war as a test of obedience. Others believe it was a metaphor for his frustrations, his inability to silence the political noise around him. A few, more spiritual scholars, suggest it was a form of penance, that Maurice, burdened by guilt from past bloodshed, had chosen a new kind of battle, one where no human blood would be spilled. Regardless, you're now in it, knee-deep. The final straw comes when a noble guest, visiting from Utrecht, asked to leave early because the frog noise gave her visions of the apocalypse. That night, Prince Maurice summons a council. You're there, standing behind a minister of ponds. Yes, that's a thing now. And you hear the decision. The frogs will be targeted for permanent relocation. Not extermination. Not yet, but removed. All of them. How? Someone dares ask. The prince smiles. We build a boat. You blink. A boat, sire? Yes, he says. A frog barge. We lure them in. Then we sail them downriver into exile. There is a silence, so awkward you feel your hairline recede. And yet no one says no. By morning, the plans are underway. The frog barge is real. The war has shifted again. And you, dear listener, are now on logistics. You're woken before dawn by a trumpet, not the usual call to arms or breakfast. No, this one is played directly outside your quarters by a very enthusiastic page boy who shouts, "All hands on deck! The frog barge awaits." You sit up slowly, staring at your boots. They're still damp. Of course they are. Your back aches. Your dreams are haunted by amphibian laughter, and your first task today involves building a boat for frogs. The royal courtyard is chaos. Workers haul lumber, rope, and tar while engineers sketch frantic blueprints on tabletops. The frog barge, officially dubbed the HMS Amphibia by the prince, he thinks is clever, is meant to be both elegant and persuasive, designed to entice frogs aboard with soft surfaces, leafy hiding spots, and, for reasons no one can explain, a miniature water feature. Someone tries to install a stained glass window. You gently redirect him to frog-catching duty. Prince Maurice stands on a nearby balcony in full military dress. Plumed hat, velvet sash, polished boots that have absolutely no place near a swamp. He watches the work below like a proud general preparing for battle. You will lead the first voyage, he tells you. Take the amphibians as far as the delta. Release them there. Do not look back. You nod. You want to ask why, but you know the answer would only unravel what's left of your sanity. Historians still debate whether this barge episode was symbolic, a gesture of benevolent conquest, or an earnest attempt to solve the problem without violence. One camp argues the prince saw himself as a kind of enlightened ruler, stern but merciful. Another claims he was testing the limits of how far his court would follow him into madness. You, meanwhile, are in charge of snacks for the frog crew. Your orders are clear. No garlic, they tested it. Frogs hate it. Plenty of shade and 1 live cricket per crate. The logistics alone would stun an actual navy. That afternoon, you supervise loading procedures. The frogs are caught one by one, netted with velvet gloves, whispered to, some of the handlers believe in gentle persuasion, and placed into padded crates with tiny air holes. It's like preparing a luxury cruise for pond dwellers. The operation is absurd, exhausting, and somehow effective. By sunset, you've captured 43 frogs, including the Baron, who sits regally in a small basket with a grape like a scepter. You're not sure if you respect him or deeply resent his influence over your sleep schedule. The barge is finally complete, flat-bottomed, gently rocking the moat, its name painted in gold letters across the side. Someone strung up bunting. Someone else added a bell that rings every time a frog shifts in its crate. The launch is ceremonial. The prince delivers a brief speech, mostly composed of military metaphors and a half-baked reference to Noah's Arkansas. Then he waves a silk handkerchief, and you step aboard. You're joined by 2 other soldiers, a frog handler and the palace bard, who's been commissioned to record the event in song. Even though he's seasick standing on a pier, the oars dip into the water. Slowly, you drift away from the palace. You're not far down the canal when you realize something strange. The frogs are silent, not a single croak. They sit quietly in their crates, watching you, observing. You feel judged, deeply judged. You pass fields of wind-bowed barley, quiet villages where farmers pause to stare at your boat, then each other, as if to say, is this real? It is. At one point, the bard begins to sing. Musical note, "Oh, frogs of war, so green, so small. You shook the prince, you shook us all." Musical note. He gets seasick halfway through verse 2 and vomits over the side. You push on. At dusk, you reach the delta. A wide stretch of water. Reeds as far as the eye can see. Herons lifting into the sky like ghost sails. It's quiet, peaceful. You unload the crates. Carefully, respectfully, you open each one, and the frogs hop out. Slowly at first, then faster, until they vanish into the reeds like they were never there. You pause by the Baron's basket. He stares at you. You stare back. Then he hops down, stops once to croak, short and final, and disappears into the dusk. You wait a moment longer, unsure why your chest feels heavy. Then you row back. When you return, the palace is eerily calm. Prince Maurice greets you on the veranda. Was it done? Yes, sire. They're gone. He nods. And for one night, there is silence. True, blessed, ear-tingling silence. You sleep like a child. The whole court does. The guards smile at breakfast. The cooks hum while kneading dough. You think you hear someone say, "We made it." And then, on the 3rd night, it begins again. A single croak. Then 2. By midnight, it's a full chorus. The frogs are back. No one knows how. Theories swirl like smoke. Did they follow the barge? Did new frogs take their place? Are we caught in some kind of eternal croaking cycle? Prince Maurice doesn't take it well. He storms into gardens and shouts into the night. "You cannot win. I banish you." A frog lands on his shoulder. He screams. So, do you? The next morning, the prince issues a new decree. No mercy. The barge is burned. The crate smashed. And now you're at war again. But this time it's personal. Historians still marvel that this absurd campaign lasted as long as it did. Some say it was a metaphor that spiraled beyond control. Others say Maurice simply couldn't bear to lose. A few fringe scholars believe he felt chosen, divinely selected to defeat the frogs in some epic moral struggle. You, standing in scorched slippers with a frog inside your helmet, just wonder if you'll ever hear silence again. One thing is clear. The frogs won't go quietly. And neither, apparently, will you. It begins at dawn, as most regrettable decisions do. The morning is damp with that ever-present Dutch drizzle, like the clouds are sighing directly on your head. You're eating cold porridge under a canvas tarp, because the royal kitchens are now exclusively preparing wartime rations for frog combatants. When the trumpet blares again, Not the fancy, ceremonial one. This one sounds like it's been stepped on by a goat. Mobilize, someone shouts. We're going in. You choke on your porridge. This is Operation Swamp Thunder, the prince's newest campaign, his final stand, his masterpiece of military absurdity. You and a small unit of increasingly skeptical palace guards are being deployed directly into the marshes to perform a full-scale search and destroy mission. No more relocation, no more lullabies. This is boots in the mud, steel in hand, torchlight in the fog. Well, half the boots are borrowed, and most of the steel is decorative. But still, you're going to war. You've barely strapped on your chest plate, a hand-me-down from a ceremonial parade uniform, when a court page hands you a scroll. It's the official battle order, complete with title, a seal, and an unhelpful drawing of a frog with excess for eyes. Your assignment, 3rd Lily Pad Division. Your objective, neutralize all Croaking in Quadrant 7. Your strategy, advance with caution, trust no pond. Historians still argue whether Prince Maurice ever truly expected this to succeed. Some claim the objective was never frog extermination. It was a distraction for court, while larger political moves were being made behind velvet curtains. Others insist he'd simply cracked from sleeplessness, the rib bits worming into his soul until he snapped. Whatever the cause, your boots are now squelching through peat and pond slime. The mission begins with torchlight and whispered commands. Your squad, 7 strong, including 2 who are definitely not sober, moves in a staggered line formation along the outer marsh. 1 carries a net, 1 carries a pike, and 1 just keeps whispering they're watching us while clutching a ladle. You press forward. The marsh is thick, sticky alive. Dragonflies buzz like faulty arrows. Something splashes ahead, and half your unit ducks instinctively. The other half screams. Calm down, hisses your captain. That was just a duck. Then the duck croaks. You all freeze. It's not a duck. It's a frog. A large, deeply unbothered frog, the size of a dinner roll, sitting in the mud like it owns the place. The captain raises his blade, but before he can strike, the frog leaps. Fast, faster than anything that damp and lumpy should move. It disappears into a tangle of reeds with a wet thwop. Then, as if on cue, the chorus begins. From every side, loud, surrounding, mocking. You swear one of them hits a note you haven't heard before. It vibrates in your chest like a tuning fork. Your team panics. Nets fly. Spears jab wildly into shadows. 1 man slips and lands face first into a patch of moss that may or may not be sentient. Another starts flinging breadcrumbs and yelling, "Distract them with carbs!" You do your best to maintain composure, which mostly involves crouching behind a boulder and trying not to cry. The worst part? It's kind of beautiful out here. The moonlight hits the water just right. Fireflies flicker like fairy embers. The frog's croaks echo through the mist in eerie musical layers. If you weren't so deeply involved in this ridiculous campaign, you might find it poetic. But then your boot sinks into something squishy. You look down. It's not mud. It's a pile of frogs. They stare up at you in silent judgment, then scatter like marbles on a marble floor. You scream. Again. You're not proud of it. Back at camp, the captain tries to spin the night's events. We successfully identified 2 croaking nests and established control of 3 lily clusters. Translation: you found 2 frog hotspots, and someone fell into a pond. Prince Maurice, of course, wants numbers. How many confirmed removals? He asks, pacing in full armor, despite not having left the garden. Your captain hesitates. Well, none. But morale is strong, sir. Morris's eye twitches. Is it? You're dismissed before the argument finishes. Outside, soldiers gather around fire pits, comparing notes like survivors of a baffling dream. 1 claims he saw a frog levitate. Another swears they've learned to mimic human laughter. You almost believe it. There's a creeping sense that the frogs are no longer just frogs. There's something more. Not in a magical way, but in a, this is what happens when you stare at the same problem too long and go slightly feral kind of way. At dinner, the palace kitchen serves frog-shaped meat pies. No one touches them. Someone coughs. A frog answers from the rafters. You make eye contact with it. It does not blink. Historians still discuss the psychological toll of the campaign. Some suggest it was a sheer repetition that broke the soldiers. Night after night of being outsmarted by something that fits in your hand and eats flies. Others point to the group delusion that seemed to grow, where men began to assign personality, motive, and strategy to their croaking adversaries. You're not immune. That night, you dream of the Baron again, wearing a crown, sitting on a throne of cattails. He speaks in riddles. You wake up biting your pillow. The next day, the prince escalates things. If the frogs want war, he declares, we will bring them fire. The garden is filled with oil lamps, torches, even a few fire arrows. You are handed one. You are told to aim carefully. You do not. You trip, set your sleeve on fire, and get patted out by a butler wielding a pastry brush. Somewhere, a frog croaks derisively. The frogs are still winning. And you're losing your grip. One more sleepless night. One more soaking patrol. One more maddening chorus echoing through the reeds. And you'll either catch the enemy or become one of them. Your boots are dry for exactly 7 minutes before you're ordered back into the marsh. The prince has appointed a new commanding officer for the campaign, General van Broekhoven, a rigid, square-jawed man with a monocle that looks permanently fogged. He arrives in full regalia, wearing medals from past battles and a scowl so tight it might be keeping his hat on. You can tell right away, this guy isn't just humoring the prince. He believes in the war. At the morning briefing, he places a frog on the table. It's alive, croaking, eyes glassy. This, he says, pointing a gloved finger at it, is not just an animal. This is an infiltrator. Someone chuckles. Big mistake. General van Broekhoven slams a dagger into the table, missing the frog by inches. It doesn't even flinch. The croaking isn't random. The general growls. It's coordinated. They're sending signals. Communication grids. Possibly even reconnaissance missions. You glance at your fellow soldiers. Some are wide-eyed. Some are stifling laughter. One just nods solemnly, already too deep to turn back. The general continues. Tonight, we initiate Operation Leaper Snare. We capture a live specimen, intact, vocal. We bring it in for questioning. You raise your hand. Sir, how exactly does one interrogate a frog? He looks at you like you just suggested shaking hands with a fire. With discipline and vinegar. Historians still debate whether van Broekhoven was sincere in his amphibian espionage theories, or simply playing the role expected of him. Some biographers argue he'd once suffered heat stroke during a military campaign in Spain and hadn't been the same since. Others say he found purpose in absurdity, clinging to the frog war like a lifeline in a world increasingly run by merchants and bureaucrats. You, unfortunately, are now under his command. That night, you're part of the extraction team, tasked with capturing a high-value croaker. You're equipped with nets, gloves, a tiny brass horn for distractions, and a bag of dried beetles. The general insists frogs respect tribute. You venture deep into the marsh. The fog is thick, moonlight filtering through it like ghost smoke. The air is damp and buzzing with insect anxiety. Your team moves slowly, deliberately. No one speaks. Every splash, every distant ribbit feels like a trap. Then you hear it. A new sound. Not a croak. A click. You all freeze. Ahead, a frog sits on a stump, puffing its throat like a balloon. Its croaks come in perfect rhythm. Click. Pause. Click, click. Pause. Click. Van Broekhoven whispers. Morse code. You're not sure he knows what that is, but he sounds very confident. Move in. You approach carefully. The frog does not flee. In fact, it turns slightly, watching, calculating. You sweep your net and miss. Of course, the frog leaps away, high and far, disappearing into the reeds. But you follow. You chase it through the muck, the brush, under drooping willow branches that slap your face like annoyed ghosts. The frog is fast, agile, tactical. It doubles back. It baits you. And finally, it leads you to a clearing. There, in the center, lit by dappled moonlight, sits a rock. On the rock, 6 frogs. All in a row, all silent. You freeze. The others catch up. One gasps. The frogs croak in perfect unison, then scatter. You bag one in confusion. Barely. The others vanish like shadows and smoke. Back at the palace, General Van Broekhoven is waiting. You present the frog. Still alive. Still croaking. He leans in. What is your name? Ribbit. Who sent you? Ribbit Tribbit. What are your orders? Ribbit. Pause, Ribbit. He slams a fist on the table. It's mocking us. You're dismissed. The next day, the frog is placed in a small cage with a mirror, some water, and a quill. In case it tries to write, the general explains. You are assigned to watch it for 6 hours. It mostly just blinks. You try talking to it. You try singing. At one point, you attempt to read it a poem about loyalty in silence. It turns around and poops. You report this to the general. He nods gravely. Classic psychological resistance. It's trained. He starts drawing diagrams of its bowel movements. Historians still argue whether the single frog, the one you caught, was the real turning point of the war. Some believe its capture marked a shift from physical confrontation to full-on delusion. Others say it symbolized the court's desperation, a moment when everyone silently agreed to keep going, because stopping meant admitting it had all been pointless. Meanwhile, rumors spread that the frogs have a leader, that the Baron has returned, that he wears a crown made of silver wire and marsh grass. You hear children in town chanting his name in the streets. Baron Croak. Baron Croak. Someone's painted his face on a tavern sign. He's becoming a folk hero. And you're the fool who caught the wrong frog. Van Broekhoven becomes increasingly erratic. He starts demanding to see daily frog reports, organized by vocal pitch. He requests a cage be built large enough to hold a suspected frog general and his elite squadrons. He commissions frog-sized manacles. The blacksmith refuses. I make horseshoes, he says. Not this. The general arrests him for insubordination. The frogs, meanwhile, intensify their efforts. At least, according to Van Broekhoven. Notice the patterns, he says, showing you chalk markings of croak intervals. They've developed a warning system. 2 long croaks, 1 short, means human proximity. You don't know whether to laugh or cry. That night, the interrogated frog escapes. No one knows how. The cage was locked, the windows barred. But it's gone. Van Broekhoven insists it was a coordinated rescue. He starts speaking in croaks. You're sent back to the marsh the next morning with a new mission. Find the escaped prisoner. Alive, if possible. Singing, ideally. And somehow, you're not even surprised anymore. This is your life now. You hunt frogs for a prince who can't sleep. You report to a general who talks to amphibians. You start to suspect the frogs are mocking you personally. And worst of all, you might be beginning to deserve it. The next few days pass in a sort of damp, croaking blur. You lose track of how many times you've fallen into the same pond. You stop noticing the stink of mildew on your tunic. The marsh mud has permanently stained your boots, and you're pretty sure your left sock is growing moss. But the worst part? The war is no longer a palace secret. It's reached the court, and oh, how they react. Word of the frog war spreads through The Hague faster than an unpaid fishmonger. You overhear 2 noblemen chuckling about in the corridor, one describing it as the most royal waste of time since Count Arn tried to duel a cloud. Another claims it's performance art, a statement, he says, swirling wine, on the futility of power. You trudge past them, smelling upon scum and failure. By evening, it's everywhere. The court has split into factions, not military ones, fashionable ones. Some nobles wear green sashes now, calling themselves the loyalists of Croak. Others counter with frog-themed brooches, tiny enamel things that blink when they move. The kitchens bake frog-shaped biscuits, some with jam centers that squish a little too realistically when bitten. It should be offensive. It is offensive, but it's also uncomfortably catchy. At one banquet, a soprano performs a new ballad titled "Croak No More, My Lily Lord," accompanied by lute and actual frog croaks pre-recorded onto a wax cylinder. The applause is thunderous. The frogs outside join in on cue. Prince Maurice, seated stiffly at the head table, does not smile. Historians still argue whether this reaction, the satire, the spectacle, the court-wide adoption of amphibian aesthetics, was harmless fun or calculated defiance. Was it mockery disguised as trend, or trend mistaken for allegiance? The line is thin and dangerously slippery. A week later, you're summoned to the Council of Reeds. No, you didn't mishear that. That's what they're calling it. The prince has gathered his remaining advisors, all of whom now seem deeply uncertain whether they serve a kingdom, a command post, or an experimental theater troupe. You stand at attention, next to a man holding a frog-shaped gavel. The discussion begins with a troubling update. The croaks have increased by 16%. How was that measured? Someone asks. A listener's logbook, verified by 2 scribes. The prince sighs. We need silence, not statistics. The court jester, who for some reason has been appointed minister of amphibian humor, raises a hand. Sire, might I propose a compromise? No. Perhaps we could simply move the palace? The prince's eyelid twitches. Move the palace? Well, the frogs wouldn't follow. They always follow. Silence. You glance around. Everyone's afraid to speak. Even the guy holding the frog gavel looks like he wants to disappear into the floorboards. The meeting ends with a new decree. All persons within royal residence must remain vigilant. Any croaking shall be reported. Any laughter shall be punished. Because that's the real problem now. The laughter, not just behind closed doors. It's slipping into the open, during briefings, during dinner, during the prince's increasingly theatrical speeches in which he paces the halls like a prophet, warning of a green tide rising. You're sent to the market to resupply. You can't walk 3 stalls without seeing frog-themed merchandise, carved wooden figurines, croaking toys, a child's hat with bulging eyes that blink when you turn your head. You spot a pamphlet titled The Truth About the Frog Rebellion, Why We Must Yield to Their Wisdom. You buy one, just to read. It's surprisingly well written. You fold it quickly and pretend it's lettuce when a guard walks by. By the 3rd week of this madness, the local economy has adapted. Farmers are selling anti-frog herbs. Artisans offer enchanted frog-calling whistles. One merchant is peddling tiny spears, just in case the frogs arm themselves. You see a man juggling frogs outside a tavern, while people cheer. No one stops him, least of all you, that night. You return to the palace and find your room has been redecorated. You stare at the mural above your bed. It's you, in full uniform, battling a swarm of heroic, winged frogs who wear little capes and wield scrolls. One of them looks suspiciously like the Baron. You sit on your cot and whisper, I didn't ask for this. Outside your window, the croaking is louder than ever. Historians still marvel at how the war's absurdities spread through art and culture. Painters, musicians, playwrights, all found inspiration in the ridiculous saga of a prince versus pawn life. And yet, despite the ridicule, no one dared stop it. Perhaps because it was easier to paint it than oppose it. The next morning, you're sent to fetch frog data from the scribe's quarters. Inside, you find an enormous scroll labeled Croak Frequencies by Moon Phase. Another reads Frog Displacement Theory, a philosophical inquiry. One is just a long list of names. At the top, it says, Suspected Sympathizers. You find your name halfway down. You spend the rest of the day scrubbing mud from your armor while humming the Lily Lord ballad under your breath. The prince storms through the courtyard around noon, shouting something about betrayal and wet footprints in his study. The guards stiffen. No one breathes. You hear the croak again. Louder, closer, from inside the walls. Find it, the prince hisses. Tear up the floorboards if you must. You help. You do. You lift rugs. You poke under chairs. You even check the harpsichord. Nothing. Then you see it. A small frog, perched on a windowsill, regal, unmoving. You freeze. So does the prince. He approaches. Slowly, softly, He reaches out, and it hops onto his shoulder, and croaks. Just once. Then it sits there, a little king on a bigger one. No one breathes. Then the jester coughs. Just once. And that's all it takes. The prince screams. The frog leaps. You dive. Someone faints. A vase explodes. And somewhere in the courtyard, a child begins to sing. Musical note. Baron Croak has come to call. He sings his song and haunts us all. Musical note. The war is not just a war now. It's a circus. And the court? We're all in costume. The markets are chaos. You walk to the town square half expecting to see a battle. But what greets you instead is a riot of color, laughter, and frog legs. Not on the menu, mind you, but painted on banners, stitched onto tunics, and dancing across bakery signs. A potter spins a ceramic frog with a monocle. A barber offers frog cuts, croak-tested styles. You pass a man selling guaranteed frog whistles, which look suspiciously like regular reeds. Frog fever has gripped the populace, and you, poor mud-wrinkled servant soldier, are now a minor celebrity. You catch your reflection in a shop window. Dirty boots, crooked helmet, hair that's been through one too many panic sweats. And there, next to your distorted reflection, is a poster. Live reenactment. The Frog Battle Quadrant 7. You blink. There you are. Well, not you exactly, but caricature view, eyes wide, mouth open, holding a frog like it's a sacred relic. The frog is wearing a tiny crown. The poster promises humor, heartbreak, and amphibians galore. You groan. You're public property now. Back at the palace. The prince is not taking it well. The satire has reached his study. Sketches tucked into his mail. A tapestry gifted by a noblewoman from Utrecht that shows frogs attending a royal court. There's even a new dance making rounds at court functions. The Croaker's Waltz. It involves exaggerated hopping, deep bows, and, if rumors are true, a final flourish where you toss a green glove and shout, "Not my lily." You try not to laugh. You fail. Historians still debate whether the market's response to the frog war signaled deeper unrest. Some say it was just laughter, innocent, even therapeutic, a way for people to process the bizarre. Others argue it was quiet rebellion, a mirror held to power's face, showing just how ridiculous it could look under the wrong lighting. But whatever the motive, it's spreading. You find yourself standing in line at a bakery where the loaves now come stamped with a little frog sigil. The baker, a round man with a mustache like a sleepy squirrel, winks at you, half off for Heroes of the Marsh. You're too tired to correct him. Then you hear it, a new song, different from the others, slower, sadder, musical note. He croaks alone beneath the moon, a prince with pride undone too soon, musical note. It's catchy, beautiful even, and dangerously close to treason. That evening, you report to your usual marsh patrol only to find it's been upgraded. The prince has ordered new uniforms, green, embroidered with silver thread, shaped like stylized frog skin. They shimmer under torchlight. You look ridiculous. So does everyone else. But no one dares complain. Not after what happened to the steward, who called the croaking romantic. He's still scrubbing chamber pots. You march in formation through the reeds. Somewhere, a bard trails behind you, sketching. You hear him whisper, "This'll go nicely in Chapter 5. You roll your eyes, and then something unexpected. The frogs are quiet. No croaking. Not a chirp. Not a peep. Just whine through cattails and the squelch of boot and mud. Itsuri. One soldier breaks rank to check a pond. Empty. Another scans a tree-lean. Stillness. A third whistles. What a frog calls the musicians developed last week. Nothing. The frogs are gone. Historians still argue what this moment meant. Some say it was coincidence. Others believe it was coordinated. That the frogs, somehow sensing the shift in tone, this transformation of war into farce, chose to retreat, leaving behind silence like a slap. Back at the palace, the news spreads fast. The croaking has ceased. The prince hears it and immediately suspects betrayal. They're planning something, he growls. This is misdirection. You want to believe it's over. that the Marsh campaign, the interrogations, the interrogated frogs, and the frog-themed breakfast pastries can all be behind you now. But the prince isn't celebrating. He doubles patrols. He sends scouts upriver. He starts carrying a small mirror with him to check behind bushes. He even bans the frog-themed ballads. The last minstrel, who sang one during supper, was relocated to goat-feeding detail. On the North Farm, you don't even have goats. In town, the silence is taken very differently. Artists turn solemn. Poets compose odes titled things like Croaking Sky and The Final Hop. A local baker makes black frosted cookies in the shape of frog coffins. The market goes quiet, almost reverent. And you begin to feel uneasy, because silence in this world is not peace. It's a warning. 3 days pass. No croaks. Then 5. Then 7. And just when people begin to breathe again, to laugh again, to take down their frog-shaped lanterns, it happens. A painting, hung anonymously in the town square. It's magnificent. A huge oil canvas, over 10 feet tall. It shows a prince, standing waist-deep in the marsh, arms outstretched, surrounded by frogs, not fighting them, not banishing them, but crowning them. At the center, the Baron, larger than life, seated on a throne of cattails, holding a scroll labeled Peace Treaty. It's a masterpiece and a political bomb. The prince sees it at dawn. He says nothing, just stares at it for a long, long time, then walks away. The painting stays up, because no one dares remove it. Later that night, the frogs return. They croak only once. Just one clean, unbroken chord, then vanish again. You sit in the courtyard, alone, listening to the echo, and wonder if this was ever about frogs at all, or if, perhaps, it was always about something quieter, something that croaks in the background of every kingdom, every ego, every sleepless night. A sound no one knows how to silence. The philosophers arrive on horseback. 3 of them, all dressed like they raided the same bookshop. Wide-brimmed hats, cloaks that smell faintly of sandalwood and rain-soaked vellum. They dismount with the theatrical confidence of people who think in Latin and correct your grammar before asking your name. You watch from a distance, arms crossed, wondering which poor soul invited the thinkers. Answer, Prince Maurice. Of course it was. You're summoned to the East Wing, where the philosophers are already holding court. Quite literally. The chairs have been rearranged in a circle, the candelabers re-angled for discussion lighting, and someone has brought in a small chalkboard that now reads in neat script the vocal capabilities of Rana Temporaria as political dissent. You can't decide if you're impressed or terrified. The lead philosopher, a wiry man with ink-stained fingers and a nose like a bent quill, stands and speaks. We are here not merely to understand the frogs, he declares, but to listen. You whisper to the scribe beside you. Didn't we try that already? Ended with a flaming boat and a net full of bad decisions. He shushes you. This one taught Descartes' nephew. Be polite. The philosophers have theories. So many theories. Theory 1. The frogs croak in reaction to human emotion. They reflect us, says the second philosopher, a soft-eyed woman in violet gloves. They're the acoustic mirror of power. Theory 2. The frogs are a divine message. We are the Babel builders, intones the third, a monkish figure who quotes psalms at alarming speed. And they, croaking in chaos, speak God warnings. Theory 3. Hotly debated, the frog are just frogs. This theory is dismissed almost immediately. You are then brought in as a primary witness. The lead philosopher leans toward you. Tell us about the night they went silent. You describe it. Every damn boot step, every eerie absence, every goosebump at the echo's end. They nod, scribble notes, murmur things like fascinating and unhallowed hush. Then they ask about the Baron. You hesitate, because saying, I think he's real in a room full of scholars is like handing them a sword and turning around slowly. Still, you tell them about the throne of reeds, the stare, the dreams. The monk strokes his chin. Perhaps this Baron is no single frog, but manifestation, a croaking conscience, a Jungian amphibian. You don't know what that means, but it sounds expensive. Prince Maurice enters halfway through a chalkboard demonstration titled Throat Inflation as Symbolic Resistance. He stands in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes narrow, then says flatly, "Have they solved it yet?" The philosophers freeze. The lead one coughs. "Solved, sire." The croaking, the war, the madness. "Ah!" The man says, adjusting his cuffs. "Not yet." The prince turns and walks out. No one follows. Historians still argue whether Maurice believed the philosophers could actually help. Some say it was a last-ditch hope wrapped in arrogance. If anyone could validate his crusade, surely it was the thinkers. Others think it was punishment. Let the frogs torment them. 2. The next night, you're invited to dine with the philosophers. Roasted eel, dense bread, and a pungent wine that might be just vinegar with ideas. You sit on a cushion, surrounded by diagrams of frog larynxes and notes written in 3 languages. The monk pours you a drink and whispers, "Did you know frog calls differ by region? One croak may be a mating song, another a declaration of war." You nod. "I've heard both." The woman in violet asks, "Do you ever dream of the frogs?" You pause, then answer, "Only when I'm awake." They nod solemnly. One writes it down. You feel like a footnote. And then, suddenly it begins again. The croaking. From outside. Loud. Urgent. Different. You all rush to the balcony. The marsh glows in moonlight. The reeds sway like dancers. And the frogs, dozens, maybe hundreds, are aligned along the banks, croaking in perfect rhythm. Croak. Croak, croak. Pause. Croak. The philosophers gasp. It's structured. Like a chant. No, a warning. The monk drops to his knees. We are the heretics. You back away slowly. In the courtyard, Prince Maurice arrives in his night robes, flanked by guards. He stares at the frogs, then at the philosophers, then at you. "Well," he asks. The lead philosopher clears his throat. "We believe this may be a form of language, possibly even organized ritual behavior." "So you agree," Maurice says slowly. "The frogs are conspiring." There's a long pause. Then, "Yes, sire, possibly." Maurice smiles. "Excellent." He turns to his guards. "Double the patrols." You rub your temples. Historians still wonder about this moment. The night philosophy gave the war its strangest blessing. Some call it a turning point. Others, a farce within a farce. The next morning, there's a frog-shaped cake delivered to the scholars' quarters. No one admits who sent it. The philosophers depart 2 days later. Quietly, looking changed. The monk leaves behind a handwritten poem titled Echoes in the Reeds. The prince never reads it. You do. It ends with, "Perhaps the croak is not a threat, but something deeper we forget. A sound not meant to stir up dread, but say, we live. You sleep, we tread." That night, you hear the frogs again. Not as enemies, not as noise, but like something older, wiser, just loud enough to remind you you're not the only ones awake. You've given up on sleeping indoors. Too many creaks, too much echo, and now that even the walls seem to croak back at you, you've decided to move your cot to the palace courtyard, less haunted, somehow, than your quarters with its peeling frog mural, and the one floorboard that sighs like a dying toad every time you shift your weight. You lie under the stars, a thin blanket over your knees, watching the silhouettes of bats flicker past the moon. Then it starts. A croak, 2, a dozen, and just like that, the whole swamp comes alive. This time, it's different. It's not just noise. It's thunder. The frogs have leveled up. You sit upright and scan the perimeter. Every guard is already alert, spears in hand, eyes wide. You're not the only one who hears it. The volume is unbearable. Windows rattle. The lanterns flicker. Somewhere inside the palace, someone drops a tray, and the crash goes unnoticed beneath the sonic assault of amphibian fury. The frogs are loud, louder than ever, louder than war drums. Historians still debate what exactly happened on that night. Some call it the apex of the frog war, A final escalation that broke the psychological levee holding back the court's last bit of reason. Others suggest something more supernatural. A curse, a convergence of tides, maybe a sound resonance phenomenon bouncing across the lowlands like a choir of swamps. All you know is this: you can't hear your own thoughts. You press your palms against your ears. It barely helps. And then someone yells. They're circling the palace. You rush to the northern wall. The reeds along the outer moat are heaving. In the moonlight, hundreds of frogs are visible, hopping, pacing, lining up like tiny sentries. They croak in waves now. Call and response. Croak, croak, pause. Croak, croak, pause. It's terrifying and oddly musical. A nobleman half-dressed leans out a window and screams into night. Go back to the mud, you green devils. The frogs croak louder. Back inside the war room, Prince Maurice is shaking with something between fury and vindication. They mock us, he says, pacing. They celebrate their defiance. You're handed a horn and told to alert the musicians. Musicians? Yes, barks the captain. Phase 3. You know there was a Phase 3. Minutes later, the palace orchestra is herded outside in their nightgowns and powdered wigs. They line up awkwardly on the terrace with their lutes, viols, and flutes, each holding their instrument like a shield. The frogs have a chorus. The prince says, "We must drown them out." You wince. This won't go well. At first, it's absurd. A lullaby played gently into the abyss. The viol players sway in rhythm, eyes darting nervously toward the reeds. Then the frogs respond. Louder, shriller, faster. The orchestra stumbles. One violinist breaks a string. The percussionist flees. The prince orders, louder, but the frogs surge in volume again and again, until, boom, a window shatters. The sheer sound, the vibration, has cracked glass. The frogs don't stop. The next morning, the place looks like a battlefield. Shards of crystal, bent horns, a broken harp half-draped over a hedge. The prince doesn't speak for hours. And now the rumors begin. Of a curse. People whisper that someone offended an old marsh spirit, that the frogs are messengers of judgment, that Baron Croak is more than a myth, he's a deity, or a demon, or both. The baker's daughter refuses to leave her house without a garlic necklace. A midwife swears she saw frogs lining up on her windowsill in alphabetical order. A sailor refuses to dock his boat, claiming the croaking cause emotional instability in the ropes. You try to stay calm, logical, but even you've noticed the signs. Your boots vanish for a day. When you find them, a frog is sleeping inside one. A croak sounds inside the chapel, even though the doors are shut. And worse, the frogs seem louder indoors now. You try to pray, but your voice feels drowned out. Historians still argue whether this phenomenon was actual escalation or simply a matter of perception. When you're haunted by a sound, any sound, it begins to shape your reality. One theory suggests the croaks resonated at a frequency that agitated the human nervous system. Another says it was mass hysteria, a ripple of panic fed by sleeplessness and ridiculous costumes. But then come the real superstitions. The garlic necklaces become standard wear. People begin lighting candles and muttering little chants before entering the garden. One soldier claims rubbing lily pads on your forehead wards off amphibian aggression. Another insists you have to compliment the frogs, out loud, or they'll mark you. You test this theory. You walk past particularly smug-looking frog and whisper, "Lovely posture." It blinks, croaks, doesn't jump. You try it again with another. Same result. You don't tell anyone. You're not ready to be that person yet. And still, the croaking worsens. At one point, Prince Maurice considers moving the entire court. He draws up plans for a new palace, one surrounded entirely by gravel. No water, he says. No reeds. No echoes. But the council intervenes. Finally, the frogs have broken more than glass. They've broken protocol. A delegate from Amsterdam arrives. She listens to the frogs for 5 minutes before declaring, "This is absurd. Fix it or resign." The prince snarls. But for once, doesn't argue. That evening, he summons his closest circle, including you. We've exhausted reason, he says, voice quiet, and science. Now we try something else. He pulls out a talisman, woven twigs, marsh moss, and a single black feather. Bring the witch. You blink. Witch, sire? Yes, he says, teeth clenched. The bog woman. They say she lives beyond Canal Bend. If these are cursed creatures, we meet curse with counter-curse. You want to object. You really do. But outside, the frogs croak again. And this time, the sound comes with a tremor in your bones, as if something ancient has just cleared its throat. You never thought your military service would involve hiking into the mist-choked lowlands to fetch a suspected swamp witch. But here you are, boots soaked, torch flickering, and armed only with a satchel of appropriate offerings, some bread, 2 coins, and a dried beetle, just in case frogs aren't the only audience tonight. The fog grows thicker the farther you trudge. It rolls in low over the reeds, curling around your knees like curious fingers. Every croak echoes, amplified by the silence of your own thoughts screaming. What am I doing? The woman appears exactly where she's supposed to, because of course she does. A shack, half sunk in the muck. Window glowing amber. A thin line of smoke curls from a chimney that appears to be made of stacked turtle shells. It smells like sage, burnt sugar, and someone else's regrets. She steps out before you knock. Tall, cloaked, eyes so pale you wonder the fog just moved into her skull and never left. I wonder when you come, she says, voice dry as cattail fluff. Took longer than I expected. You blink. You were expecting? She shrugs. Everything that croaks eventually summons me. You hold out the bread. She takes the beetle. Let's go. And that's it. No dramatic negotiations. No riddles or spooky chanting. She simply grabs a gnarled walking stick, whispers something to a frog on her porch, and follows you back toward the palace. Historians still argue whether this woman ever existed. Some claim she was a real person, an herbalist from the wetlands with a knack for theatrics. Others believe she was a legend invented by later writers, a symbol of how desperate and magical the war had become. But the palace records refer to her by name, brow-grown, literally Madame Green. You arrive back just before dawn. The frogs are still at it. Maurice waits in the garden, arms crossed, face carved from stone. You think he might explode when he sees her, but instead, he just nods. A small nod, the kind you give when you've tried everything else and might as well try the impossible. She walks the ground silently, dragging her stick through the dirt in looping patterns. She mutters. She pauses beside a lily pond and laughs once, quietly. Then she turns to Maurice and says, "You've made them angry." He scoffs. "They're frogs." "They were frogs," she replies. "Now they are your reflection." She looks at him with eyes that seem too large for her skull. Arrogant, unyielding, loud. Oof. You wince. So do several nobles pretending to be bushes. Maurice says nothing. She hands him a bundle of herbs. Burn this at sunset. Say nothing. Do nothing. Let the frog speak. He does not thank her. She doesn't seem to care. She vanishes before breakfast. And so, at sundown, the ritual begins. A circle of reeds. The herbs smoldering. Prince Maurice standing stiffly inside, surrounded by guards who all with the face of someone being paid not quite enough for this. You watch from a window. The scent wafts up, rich, earthy, oddly floral. The sky turns peach and lavender. The frogs croak. Steady, measured. Then they stop. All of them. Silence drops like a velvet curtain. It's not peace. It's not quiet. It's expectation. Maurice stands in the circle, unmoving. You hold your breath. And then a single croak, loud, confident, from right behind him. He turns. A frog sits on the prince's boot. It doesn't move. It just croaks again. And you swear to every holy relic and marsh god. You hear it say, "Yield!" Maurice stares at it for a long time. Then, for the first time in this entire war, he laughs. A sharp, incredulous, real laugh. And just like that, the frog hops away. Historians still argue what happened next. Did Maurice finally break? Or did he wake up? Some say he took that frog's message as divine instruction. Others believe he simply found humor in his own reflection, croaked back at it, and surrendered the part of himself that thought he could control everything, even nature. Because something shifts that night. The patrols are called off, the traps removed, the nets folded, the frog-shaped helmets are quietly retired. You expect Maurice to retreat, lick his wounds, return some other obsession. But he doesn't. Instead, he calls for the scribes. All of them. You're summoned too, still unsure if you're a soldier, a witness, or a walking warning label. And there, in the candlelit study, the prince speaks more softly than you've ever heard. Write it down, he says. Everything, every moment, from the first croak to now. Even the barge, one scribe asks. Especially the barge. He pauses. History will forget us if we don't. You nod, but you also wonder, is that a wish or a fear? Some scholars think this was his way of reclaiming the narrative. If he couldn't win the war, at least he could own the story. Others say it was a subtle form of surrender, putting down the sword, picking up the pen, and choosing to laugh before others could do it for him. Either way, the Frog War is no longer a secret. It becomes public record. The satire continues, of course. Songs, murals, one truly awful stage play in which the prince is portrayed by an actual goose wearing a crown. It was not well received. But among it all, something changes. The frogs remain. They croak, yes, every night, but it no longer feels like a threat, more like background music, a reminder of pride, of absurdity, of the line between ruling and unraveling. Historians still revisit this moment, the witch's warning, the circle of herbs, the final croak, and argue over what it meant. But you don't argue anymore. You just listen, because deep down you know the truth. The frogs didn't start the war. They just sang through it. And maybe that was a lesson all along. By now, your armor has rusted in all the wrong places. You've stopped checking for frogs in your boots. Not because they're no longer there, but because you've reached a mutual understanding. You wear the boots. They occasionally ride along, and no one speaks of it. The war, as everyone reluctantly agrees, is winding down. That doesn't mean it ended. Oh no, Prince Maurice would never admit defeat so plainly. Instead, the campaign shifts. You're pulled from night patrol and reassigned to Bureau of Marsh Containment Strategy, which, as far as you can tell, is a room with damp scrolls and one tired cartographer who's still drawing frogs with little question marks above their heads. Your task: organize reports of remaining amphibian activity. The first entry you receive reads, Quadrant 3, frog sighted, wearing lily hat, possibly smug. You stare at it. You file it anyway. Historians still puzzle over this final stage of the war. Was it deliberate retreat, bureaucratic theater, or just the prince's way of gently shoveling dirt over the whole mess without admitting anything had gone wrong? You suspect a mix of all three. For weeks, nothing happens. The frogs keep croaking, but the palace stops reacting. No more midnight drills. No more frog interrogations. You even see the former General Van Broekhoven one morning walking slowly around the garden with a watering can, gently misting the lilies. He nods at you. You nod back. No one mentions the manacles he once commissioned. Then one morning, just before sunrise, the prince calls for one last operation. We're ending this, he says, with grace. You and the remaining members of your old frog patrol, the ones who haven't fled or become poets, are gathered in the outer courtyard, where a cart has been loaded with fireworks, eel oil, and a single ceremonial cannon. Maurice emerges dressed in his finest uniform. There's a new insignia on his shoulder, a silver frog, resting on a crossed reed and rapier. It's the first time he's embraced the symbolism. The frogs have made their statement, he says, and so shall we. He lifts a lantern. You wheel the cart toward the marsh. It's quiet. The frogs are there, of course, but they don't croak. They watch. Dozens of them. Silent. Still. It's unsettling, like you become the entertainment now. You reach the center of the clearing. The prince plants a small banner, a white flag embroidered with a frog and a crown. Then he signals the cannon crew. Boom! A single burst of light. Gold sparks. A sizzle. A frog-shaped firework spins skyward, explodes in silence, and rains down glittering green. You wait. The frogs don't move. And then, with eerie synchronicity, they hop away, one by one, slowly, back into the marsh. You swear the Baron lingers a moment longer. Then he, too, vanishes into the reeds. That night, the croaking stops. Just stops. Not forever. Not completely. But long enough for you to remember what quiet actually feels like back at the palace. The prince says nothing. He walks alone to the halls, trailing one hand along the stone walls like he's tracing the outlines of old ghosts. You hear him whisper once, just once, let them keep their kingdom. Historians still argue about what that meant. Did he mean the frogs, the marsh, or something deeper, something about power and control, and how easily both slip away when mocked by something as small as a croak? A week later, the council convenes. Officially, it's a review of unconventional operations. Unofficially, it's a funeral for the Frog War. You're summoned to testify. Again, but this time they don't laugh. They listen, quietly, politely, even respectfully. You recount your missions, your sightings, the interrogation, the barge, the Baron, and finally you say, I don't think we ever fought them. The room shifts. The delegate from Rotterdam clears his throat. Then what did we fight? You shrug. Ourselves, maybe, or boredom. Prince Maurice doesn't attend the session. Later that night, you find him alone in the garden, sitting beside a pond that hasn't croaked in days. He gestures to the bench beside him. You sit. He says nothing for a long time. Then, do you hear it? You listen. Wind in the reeds. A distant splash. Nothing else. He smiles faintly. There's your piece. You think for a while, then ask, was it worth it? Maurice doesn't answer directly. He stands, brushes a leaf from his cloak, and says, if they ever croak again, let them. And just like that, he walks away. Historians still dissect his final days. Some say the Frog War humbled him. Others say it taught him that not all enemies are visible, or real, or enemies at all. You, meanwhile, receive an honorable discharge. Your name is listed in the final Frog Campaign report under Loyal Participants in Amphibious Conflict, High Survivability Class. It's something. You return to the countryside. Quiet place. Small cottage. A pond in the back. Every now and then you hear a croak. It doesn't bother you. You nod at the sound. Sip your tea. Let it echo. The frogs never left. Not really. They just stopped needing to fight. And maybe you did, too. You're not supposed to talk about it anymore. The Frog War officially didn't happen. Or at least not the way it's remembered in paintings, songs, or whispered asides over overly full goblets of brandy. In the Royal Archives, it's been rebranded quietly, neatly, as a training exercise in environmental response logistics. There are footnotes, appendices, a whole page dedicated to the frog-shaped insignia, now referred to as a symbol of marshward vigilance. You help write that report. You sit in a room with two scribes and an elderly historian who refuses to acknowledge frogs as sentient. He crosses out your first-hand account of the interrogation and replaces it with specimen briefly detained for croak pattern analysis. No further implications. You stop correcting him after the third time. Let them have their version. You've lived yours. Still, the erasure doesn't happen all at once. It's a slow, deliberate sanding of the truth, a denial by 1,000 polite edits. Prince Maurice himself issues the final edict. Let no royal decree or correspondence henceforth refer to the amphibian matter. And just like that, the war is over. Not by treaty, not by surrender, but by pretending it never began. Historians still argue whether this was an act of dignity or delusion. Some say the prince wished to preserve what little authority he still had. Others believe he simply couldn't stand the way people laughed when he walked into a room. Even his most loyal advisors had begun speaking in careful tones. words dipped in irony, and laughter, it lingers, especially when it's earned. You receive a parcel not long after your discharge. Inside, your old Fraud Patrol badge, newly polished, mounted on a wooden plaque. The note attached reads, "For exceptional composure and amphibious uncertainty." There's no signature. You keep it in a drawer. By now, most of your old comrades have scattered. One took up gardening. Another writes for a satirical broadsheet under the pen name Crocus Maximus. You haven't spoken to Van Broekhoven, but word is he's joined a monastery that specializes in silence. Fitting, you return to the palace once, months later, for a minor feast honoring those who safeguarded royal lands. The guest list is vague. The mood is tense. There's music, but no one dances. There's wine, but everyone sips. Then someone, perhaps emboldened or just weary of decorum, lifts a glass and says, to the frogs. A ripple goes through the room. People freeze. Eyebrows raise. Forks hover midair. Then someone else lifts their goblet. To the frogs, they echo. And just like that, the laughter returns. Quiet, careful, but real. The prince doesn't join in. He rises, excuses himself, and leaves the hall. The next day, a new memo circulates. Ban on toasts of unclear allegiance. But it's too late. The memory is alive now. Not in ledgers or proclamations, but in people. In sketches tucked behind tavern bars. In songs sung too loudly after midnight. In a child's puppet show featuring a heroic frog king named Crocus who defeats a tyrant using nothing but rhythm and reeds. In you, because try as they might to rewrite it, the war lives on, not just as farce, but as something strangely profound. You still see him sometimes, Prince Maurice, older now, grayer, quieter. He walks the garden paths in the early evening when the frogs begin to warm their throats. He doesn't flinch. He doesn't shout. He listens. That's all. Once, he passes you on the path and says, without looking, "Do you hear them?" You nod. They never really left. "No," he says with the smallest of smiles. "They just let us." You both stand there a moment longer, not in truce, but in something better, understanding. Historians never did agree on the motive. Some say it was sleeplessness. Others say it was trauma. A few insist it was performance, a prince pushing power to its logical extreme just to see who would follow. But no one doubts this. It happened, and even if it didn't quite make it into the official scrolls, the people remember, in the reeds, in the rhymes, in the soft, rhythmic hum that echoes after dark. You'll never forget it, because once, not so long ago, you helped fight a war against frogs, and lost with dignity. Time slips past like fog on a canal. The marsh dries a little every year. The frogs croak less often in the palace, once echoing with shouts, trumpet calls, and the slap of boots through muck, settles into a quieter rhythm. You don't visit as much anymore, but when you do, it always smells like wet stone and lavender. Familiar. Still, a little sad. You're older now. Not old, but old enough to need a softer chair and avoid stairs after supper. You retire to a modest cottage on the edge of a sleepy village. You have a pond behind the house. Of course you do. You didn't plan it that way. But when the realtor said seasonal frog presence, something stirred in you. A shrug, a smirk, a vague, marshy pull. The pond's not much, just a little patch of water with reeds and moss and a half-buried rowboat. But every summer, the frogs come back. Not in legions, not in unison. Just a few, croaking quietly like they remember you. And you remember them all. The night marches, the cannon that backfired, the interrogated frog, the baron, the firework, the painting in the town square, the time you mistook a boot for a frog and apologized to it for 20 minutes. It all lives inside you now. Historians still pick at the bones of it. You've read their work. One called it a prolonged psychodrama of late-stage autocracy. Another claimed the entire conflict was a metaphor for climate anxiety. In the 1600s, no less. They never get it quite right. The truth was stranger, simpler, sadder. The The frogs were never the enemy. They were just there, singing. And we, the people with power, couldn't stand the sound of something we couldn't control. You sit by the pond most evenings, a cup of tea in one hand, a journal in the other. You've started sketching again. Little frogs and crowns. Lily pads shaped like empires. A prince holding a map with no land, just water and ribbits. Sometimes a child from the village visits and asks, "Is it true?" You smile. Some of it. "Did you really go to war with frogs?" You nod. "Did you win?" You lean in, whisper like you're sharing a treasure. No one did. One rainy afternoon, a parcel arrives from the palace. Inside is a letter. The handwriting is familiar, precise, firm, but fading. It's from the prince. Short, to the point. I hear them again, and I let them. I hope you do, too. You fold the letter and place it inside your journal. That night, it rains harder than it has in months. The pond rises. The reeds sway, and the frogs sing. Not many, not loudly, but enough. You smile in the dark. You hum along, because in the end, what else can you do? You lost a war. You gained a story. And some nights, when the wind blows just right, you almost miss the madness. Now let the reeds fade. Let the soft croaking drift backward into the distance, like a lullaby from a dream you only half remember. The storm is over, the armor stored away, and the muddy boots are drying by the door. The frogs? They're just out there, somewhere in the night, blinking slowly beneath the stars, their voices carrying across still water like little ripples of memory. Take a breath. Let it out slowly. You walk through absurdity and back. You stare into the lily-pad eyes of madness and learn that sometimes battles aren't meant to be won, just witnessed, endured, learned from. Let the palace grow distant now. Let the torchlight dim and the banner sag, forgotten in the humid breeze. There's no more marching, no more orders, no more maps to redraft or generals to obey. Only the quiet, the kind that sinks into your bones and rocks you gently like a rowboat, tethered loosely to the edge of sleep. You're safe. There are no more nets to carry, no more songs of silence, just a steady rhythm of your breath, and maybe, just maybe, the faint echo of a frog, far away, calling to no one in particular. Tonight, you don't have to understand it. You just have to rest. So curl a little deeper into your blanket. Let your mind drift. And if you hear a croak or two on the wind, let them be, because you've heard worse and lived to laugh about it. Good night.